believe that in the long term, the United States is going to become one of the major powers within BRICS. Maybe they'll have to rename the organization as a Trump BRICS or something like this. But the United States now is facing a choice, and the two choices which are mutually exclusive. Either you are the global cop who is enforcing the imperial doctrines on all other countries, and then you have to maintain military bases throughout the world, and you have to be a national security state, or you're going to become a leading economy in the world and trade with others. As one of my friends, I think Larry Johnson said this, it's the choice of being the global policeman or being a polite guest at the table along with all other nations.
Hello everyone and welcome to another edition of CEO and Market Expert Interviews. I'm your host Lucian, most of you know me as Triangle Investor from social media. I'm joined today by Alex Krainer, the author of #1 rated book on commodities, Mastering Uncertainty in Commodities Trading, creator of iSystem Trend Following, publisher of Trend Compass Daily Market Reports, and editor at Zero Hedge, and generally familiar and followed name when it comes to geopolitics, commodities, and more. Mr. Alex Krainer, welcome to my show, sir.
Thank you for having me, Lucian, and greetings to all your viewers and listeners.
Thank you very much, Alex. I look forward for this chat hours. I wanted to bring you in my show for quite some time, and here you are finally. So let's start with the fresh news. And that is President Donald Trump announced that United States, Russia, and Ukraine officials will meet at the security conference in Munich for talks on how to end the war in Ukraine. My question to you is, what are the chances for success? Who will come out as a winner? And generally, how do you see that going forward?
Well, from the broadest possible perspective, I think that the humanity will come out as a winner. I think that the chances for success are great. I think they can be derailed only through, let's call it nefarious means. I think that the conditions have matured for the third alliance between the United States and Russia. And the reason why I say it's the third alliance, because we already had the second alliance, which was in World War II, and the first alliance, which was pretty much spanning the whole of the 19th century. This has been largely scrubbed from history curriculum, but Russia and the United States used to be very close friends and allies throughout most of the 19th century. And Russia played a pivotal role in US Civil War when it came to the aid of Abraham Lincoln and helped him to preserve the Union, because the empire's objective was to fracture the United States and render it into, let's call it, two weaker client entities, the North and the South, that would be dominated again by the British Empire. In school, they taught us that the British Empire was no longer, but this is not entirely true. I like to say that the British Empire is undead. It exists in a zombified form, and it acts through proxies, primarily the United States of America, which the British Empire had infiltrated at the turn of the 20th century. And since then, it has made them into let's call it the muscular giant that implements the geopolitical agenda defined by the British Empire. The empire's geopolitical imperative has always been, well, for about 2 centuries, it has been to defend their hegemony over the Eurasian landmass. And in order to defend their hegemony of Eurasian landmass, the key area to control is Central and Eastern Europe. Halford Mackinder already in the early 1900s, and he was one of the main thinkers and ideologues, statesmen of the British Empire. He said that who controls Eastern Europe controls the world. Essentially, that's and so Ukraine was extremely important to them, and they weaponized Ukraine as a bludgeon with which to destroy Russia and regime change it and partition it into, depending on who you ask, 5 smaller entities or 25, 27 smaller entities. And this is the way the British Empire has ruled the world, always divide and conquer. So you divide nations, and then you pit them one against the other. They divided India and Pakistan. They divided the Koreas into the North Korea and South Korea, and on it goes. And the American participation in this whole charade has been essential because nobody else has the economic and the military power to implement this agenda. And the British themselves, there was a report published in the House of Lords in 2018 titled something like the British foreign policy in the age of shifting, something like this. There's a whole, the report is available online still, in which they say that the second Trump administration could jeopardize the special relationship between the United States and the United Kingdom, if not end that special relationship, and that the United States is critical for Britain to achieve its foreign policy objectives. It's there in black and white. And so now we do have the second Trump administration. I think that Trump hasn't missed who was sabotaging his first administration, because remember we had the Russiagate affair.
Yes.
And Russiagate was an affair completely cooked up in London, and all the key actors in that affair were British intelligence assets. Christopher Steele, Stefan Halper, Sir Richard Dearlove, former head of the MI6, and there's another 5 or 6 names, all of them former British assets. So I think that there are no delusions in the Trump administration about who the enemy is and who the enemy is not. And I think that it is very clear that Russia is not their enemy, and so therefore they have a lot to talk about. And I think that we have a chance for a real peace and an end to the forever wars that have become a complete normal for the Western world for decades now.
Yeah, I wish we see the peace, of course. Pretty interesting angle. I want to return on the Great Britain comments, your comments. I watched few of your videos where you stated that the collapse of Great Britain is actually imminent. So what do you think that now, how do you see actually the island positioning itself in the geopolitical map in the world going forward?
Well, I see it as grasping for straws. Now they have been left with the mess in Ukraine. Now they own it. The Americans, the Trump administration has told them, we're done with this, and let Britain take the lead. And the British defense minister came out and said, well, yes, we'll take the lead. Of course, he has to put a brave face on it. He can't come out and say, oh gosh, what are we going to do? We're now lost without our muscular giant to do our dirty work for us. However, without the United States, neither the NATO nor Britain nor any individual European country, let alone the Baltic states, who are most eager to plunge into the war, have the capability to defeat Russia. So I think that they're going to continue going with this inertia, and how do you call it? Extend, like they're going to do extend and pretend. They're going to pretend that they're relevant, that
I understand.
they will pretend that they matter and that they could change things, but they cannot. And I think this is increasingly clear to even people who are pretending. So I think that it's going to end at some point. How exactly, I think it would be impossible to predict. But we can already see fractures increasingly obvious in the structure of the European Union, in NATO. We now have pretty much open hostility between two of the largest military powers within NATO, which are Turkey and the United States. And Britain is going to be left holding the bag. When I said that Britain would collapse, I don't think that it's going to be a collapse like the Soviet Union or 1929 collapse in the market collapse in the United States. I think it's going to be more along the lines of accelerating inflation, accelerating rise in interest rates in British gilts. Rise in the asset bubble on the FTSE, on the London Stock Exchange, and the gradual collapse of the British pound. And then, the Britain will have painted themselves into a corner, and either they will make nice with other nations as a sovereign, neutral island nation, or they're going to have a very, very difficult time resurrecting any semblance of relevance in the world.
Yeah, I want to touch on European Union as well. We have a lot of red flags, I would dare to say, especially with the biggest economies facing issues. Germany's economy faces longest decline in post-war history. France's public deficit exceeded, I believe, 6% of GDP, something like that. What will happen with the European Union?
I think very similar trajectory as Britain. And maybe, the thing with Great Britain is it's a sovereign nation with a unified government. European Union is an incoherent patchwork of governments. It works so long as the individual governments are obediently carrying out the directives from the unelected European Commissions and other governance bodies that nobody can quite understand what they are, who they are, what their mission is. I perceive European Union as a lot of hot air. It's enough to listen to statements from our foreign minister Kaja Kallas. She sounds like Greta Thunberg to me. Ursula von der Leyen, the head of the European Commission, is a gosh, how to put it politely? She's a corrupt liar.
Politely.
I couldn't come up with a more polite statement about her. But,
okay.
And European people see this, and they're not willing to be led by these people. So there's less and less inclination for individual nations to participate in this circus, and there is more and more support for sovereigntist movements. And so we see, the elections in Croatia, in Romania, in Slovakia, in Hungary, that people are increasingly and ever more strongly supporting the leaders who want to reassert their nation's sovereignty. And so I think that this process will continue, and then at some point we might have a breakup like the Soviet Union. Somebody will sign these Belaveja Accords, a European version of them, and then they'll declare, okay, the EU is no longer. It may seem radical and unthinkable at this moment because we've got so inured into this system and into this matrix of the European Union for decades. But things that are not sustainable have to end at some point, and that point is coming closer and closer.
Yeah. Alex, what about Israel? Israel-Hamas war and the possible scenarios there. We saw Israel threatening to intense fighting in Gaza if Hamas does not release the hostages. Will this escalate or not? How do you see Trump's next moves there?
Well, that's tomorrow, right? Trump said, and Benjamin Netanyahu said, that if all the hostages are not returned by tomorrow, 12 o'clock, probably Eastern US time, so it means 6 o'clock Central European time, that all hell will break loose again. Well, the Israelis have tried very hard to uproot Hamas in the Gaza Strip for about 16 months. If anything, Hamas today is stronger than they were on October 7, 2023. They still have popular support in Gaza. I don't see how a very much weakened Israel can now uproot. I mean, they can talk tough all they want, but Israeli economy is in a shambles. Its political class is practically at war against one another, not, let alone Hamas, Hezbollah, and everybody else. Benjamin Netanyahu is on the edge of the abyss where he might be thrown into prison, and that could be the final end of his political life. Nobody really knows what comes after Benjamin Netanyahu, but there's a risk that a civil war ensues. So I think all the tough talk, all the big declarations are a way to deflect from the weaknesses that are now rotting Israel and turning it into a failed state. In Israel, many of the ordinary social services no longer function, and hundreds of thousands of Israelis are looking to emigrate and to leave. I think that there is no future, and I think that we see that even in the United States policies. While Donald Trump is doing the big talk, they're building a massive U.S. embassy in Lebanon because they see that their unsinkable aircraft carrier is now actually sinking, and so they need to move their assets to a new one. How that's going to work out, it's not clear, but it seems that they're abandoning ship with respect to Israel. Donald Trump, his statements, which got many people very excited, are not only unrealistic, they're also repugnant. And I think that Trump himself understands this. People in Trump administration are not dumb. They can see, they can read the tea leaves. I think that what Trump is doing, he's making chess moves. These chess moves are causing some discord in the Israeli politics, because what he said, his last statement on Truth Social about Israel, on his social media platform, was that the United States is going to take ownership of Gaza after the hostilities end in Gaza. So what he's saying is the Israelis are going to go and fight. They're going to defeat Hamas. And then we're going to remove the population from there to Egypt and to Jordan. And then we're going to rebuild it there. The part that is very concerning to Israelis, especially the, let's call them, the fanatical settler fringe, is we do the fighting and then you take the ownership. How exactly does that work? So it's causing a lot of uncertainty and confusion. And I see it, I think that perhaps that is the intention behind Trump's rhetoric. and this is, Trump. This is Trump's governance style. He throws a stun grenade over there, and then he does the real dealing over there while everybody's excited about the effects of the stun grenade. So we'll see. I cannot predict, but let's remember in 2012, none other than Henry Kissinger said that 10 years from now there will be no more Israel. Okay, we're past 10 years, so timing is not possible to predict. But and when someone like Henry Kissinger said that he understood a thing or two about foreign policy and about power balances in that region. And so I think that this is probably the unspoken general mindset in the U.S. administration regarding Israel.
Mm-hmm. I want to pick your brain as well on the BRICS and Trump relation. Trump warned BRICS nations that they could face 100% tariffs if they want to play games with the dollar, sending a big message that way. How do you see the future of BRICS and their influence in the world in the years to come? And will they be weaker, stronger, the same? What's your take? I mean the BRICS, of course.
I couldn't make predictions for the short and medium term. I could make predictions for the long term.
Yeah, long term. Yeah.
I believe that in the long term, the United States is going to become one of the major powers within BRICS. Mm-hmm. Maybe they'll have to rename the organization as a Trump BRICS or something like this. But the United States now is facing a choice, and the two choices which are mutually exclusive. Either you are the global cup who is enforcing the imperial doctrines on all other countries, and then you have to maintain military bases throughout the world, and you have to be a national security state, or you're going to become a leading economy in the world and trade with others. As one of my friends, I think Larry Johnson said this, it's the choice of being the global policeman or being a polite table along with everybody. Sorry, a polite guest at the table along with all other nations. And I think that the let's call it the cost-benefit analysis strongly favors being the polite guest at the global banquet. So I think that to the extent that United States has a functional, effective democracy, it's going to be developing in this direction.
Okay, Alex, like we talked here, a lot of red flags in the world geopolitical map, on the geopolitical map. Would you say that, or is it too much to say that the chaos is the new world order? I don't want to sound like doom and gloom.
You mean the new world order as defined by the Western oligarchies?
Yeah.
Yeah, that is chaos, of course. Chaos is their it's integral part of their model of governance. Because if you have the monopoly on financial wealth, if you have the monopoly on production of weapons, particularly modern technology in weaponry, then you like chaos, because you can go to all these warring sides and you can tell them, hey, we can help you financially, we can give you loans, we can arm you so you can defeat your enemies, but you have to work with us, you have to let our corporations develop your resources, you have to let you have to be in debt to our banking institutions and so forth. And you will always find leaders who will say yes, who will accept this deal with the devil. And then you have their conditional loyalty. And if they're no longer loyal, you can always find somebody else who will orchestrate a coup. You also condition your help by opening the country to your quote-unquote non-government institutions who are there exactly so that they can stage color revolution and regime changes when it's necessary. And so in that way, you rule the world. So chaos is part and parcel of this model of governance. And it took me a long time to work it out why a military like the United States never wins a war. And the reason is because that is the purpose, to keep the war going, to keep the chaos going, not to win the war, because once you win the war, then you have to have a political solution for the society. While the war is going and chaos is going on, well, you can do all kinds of dealings under the table and create all kinds of dependencies that ultimately benefit you, that you don't really want peace.
Yeah. Alex, I want to switch to another segment of our discussion, and those are commodities and financial markets. How do you see financial markets behaving in that kind of environment, like we said, the chaos environment going forward?
Okay, so that's a very interesting question, because I would be very confident in making predictions about the European Union, about Great Britain, about Japan, and maybe some other Western countries, but not so much United States. United States has a lot of maneuvering space. So, to be very specific, the EU, Great Britain, Japan will have a progressing collapse of their currencies. We're going to have rising interest rates. We're going to have an acceleration of price inflation. And we're going to have an accelerating bull market in stocks, not bonds. Sorry, stocks. Bonds are going to go off the cliff. The reason for this is because they are already beset by debt overhangs that are unpayable. The governments in these situations and the central banks, they have two choices. One is the path of austerity, which risks to plunge the nation into a depression, which is politically always very, very difficult to do. The other path is to ramp up the printing presses, to backstop all the bad debts with freshly printed liquidity, to flood this liquidity into the market. Ultimately, this leads to a loss of confidence in the currency, because you're watching it being, the purchasing power being gradually diluted. And at some point, when people, when the critical mass of all the market participants lose confidence in their currency, what they do is they try to get rid of it as soon as they have it. Mm-hmm. And they want to invest it into real assets, something that will remain once the currency is completely destroyed. So they plunge, they allocate whatever money they can into the stock market, and that often leads to, at some point, the stock markets go vertical. And so we have seen this happen many, many times through history. We've seen it in a century ago in the Weimar Republic. We've seen it in Israel in 1986. We've seen it in places like Argentina, Zimbabwe in 2008, 2009. We've seen it in Venezuela. And, I have to warn your listeners, this is not that by investing into the stock markets you're going to be able to preserve your purchasing power, because always the collapse of the currency outpaces the gain, the capital gains, nominal capital gains that you get in the stock market. So in the end, investors end up wiped out anyway. I think that if we're talking about inflation hedging, there are two basically effective hedges. One of them is farmland, and the other one is exposure to commodity prices. Because what happens when the purchasing power of the currency progressively collapses, the inverse of this is that prices of real goods like oil, gold, silver, agricultural commodities, industrial metals, their prices go up. So these markets actually offset your loss of purchasing power. About 15 years ago, Alliance Bernstein published a very good report, which I think people can still find on the internet. It's called Deflating Inflation or something like this. I forget the exact title, but basically they look through history and they measure the inflation beta, right? And inflation beta is basically a measure of how much the price of some asset changes for the same change in inflation. So let's say, how much do the prices of stocks increase for every 1% increase in inflation? And so stocks actually have a negative inflation beta. So that is, it's less than 1. But farmland inflation beta is about, if I remember correctly, it's between 2 and 3. So that means that for every 1% increase in inflation, the value of farmland should increase between 2 and 3%. That's the historical, norm. And then commodity prices inflation beta is about 6.5, meaning that for every 1% increase in inflation, commodity prices increase about 6.5%. Many people believe that real estate is a hedge against inflation. They say, like, well, if I buy a house, if I buy an apartment, then the value of that, well, okay. Owning houses and apartments actually has a cost. And as inflation destroys the purchasing power in an economy, then even if the price of your real estate goods increases, you're not going to be able to sell it. And so if you have to sell it, the market is going to force you to, it's going to force your price down. And so, at the end of the Weimar inflation in 1922, you would have been able to buy a 6-bedroom villa in fashionable outskirts of Berlin for $100. At the time, US dollar used to be gold backed, so it's not the same value as what we're talking about today.
Of course.
But let's call it $10,000 today. That's how dramatic a collapse there was in the real estate market. Now, if you could sit on your properties, pay for the upkeep, because, all real assets decay with time, then maybe in a generation or two, you're going to get a satisfactory price on those goods, but it's going to end up costing you more in terms of upkeep, property taxes, and all of those things. So that's not a solution.
Yeah.
So for ordinary people, I would say acquire some gold and silver, the real kind that you can hold in your hand.
Yeah, that's my next question, Alex. You wouldn't put gold and silver at the top of the hedging assets.
Well, I think that gold and silver are very legitimate hedges against inflation. But they're not the only one,
Yes, of course.
Copper's going to go up, oil prices, gas prices, prices of wheat, soybeans, corn, coffee, cocoa, all of these things. So it's always better to have a diversified basket than just one thing.
Agreed.
Let's not forget, there have been times in history when the authorities confiscated people's gold. And, I can tell you this from my experience in France. Maybe 10, 15 years ago, I was able to walk into a shop on the street, buy some gold coins, pay them in cash, and walk out the door. It's no longer the case. Now I have to give them my ID. I can only pay for them, same shop. But the laws have changed. So now they want to track everybody who bought gold. So they ask your ID. You can only pay with the credit card so that the record remains, so that they can go one day and send you a letter and say, well, guess what? That gold that you bought, we want it back. We'll buy it from you, we'll compensate you, but it'll be the price that we say.
Yeah.
That happened in 1933 in the United States. People were forced to sell their gold at $25 an ounce, And then I think a year or two later they were allowed to buy it again, but now it was $35 or whatever, exact $33, I don't remember. But they took a 40% loss on that. They were basically robbed. So that can happen as well. I think it's good to have, if you can buy it anonymously, it's good. If it's not anonymous, it's still good. You can always say, well, I gifted these coins to
Exactly, or I sold it in the meantime.
Or I sold it, or I spent it, or I, drank it up, whatever. It's difficult to trace those things, and they give you some maneuvering space. But I want to throw this into because I've not written about this, I have not spoken about this anyway, so you're hearing it here for the first time.
Exclusive.
Most of my friends here in Monaco are millionaires, and I met many others over the years. And there's a common theme among them. They see all this coming, and they all have some real estate, and they have some, they have a lot in stocks, in bonds, in this and that, and most of it is paper wealth. Mm-hmm. So they're very concerned that this could get confiscated. There could be the great taking. They could be taxed away from them, and so many of them are looking for a plan B in terms of finding alternative jurisdictions where they could park their wealth. So some of them go to Uruguay, Costa Rica, UAE, and places like this. And okay, fine. As far as that goes, it's an idea, but I for some reason I'm kind of not feeling very inclined to that. I think you're actually making yourself subservient to institutions in a different jurisdiction, and they can turn on you. Because they can one day say like, oh yeah, guess what? This was not taxable before. Well, now it is, and guess what? Retroactively. So now you're at their mercy. Here's what I would do. I would consider very seriously, because it's also time for people to not just treat their own bank account and their account with the stockbroker as their portfolio. You need to look at your family's wealth. And as a family, I think you need to strategize as a whole. So I think one way to gain resilience is to create a cash business. And what I mean by a cash business, is a bar, a restaurant, an ice cream place, a service where you have electricians or car mechanics, somewhere where every day you make small transaction and cash comes in.
Yeah.
Because it gives you great flexibility. And we all know that even in the depth of depression, parents will spend a little bit of money to buy their children ice cream. So that always kind of rolls around. So rather than moving jurisdictions and making myself at home in Uruguay or Costa Rica, where, I don't belong, and I know people who have had terrible experiences with this. How about staying put where your roots are and find a pizza place, investing in a cash business.
That's a smart idea. Agreed.
And that gives you the resilience to weather the crisis. And what happens after the crisis, if you've preserved your purchasing power, if you preserved some capital, then you have the buyer's market. Again, in 1922, you would have been able to buy a 6-bedroom villa on the outskirts of Berlin for $100. So, and stocks. At that time, you would have been able to buy shares of Mercedes-Benz Corporation for their total market capitalization was the equivalent of 327 cars. So, and I bet that they must have had 327 cars in their production lots and in their dealerships throughout Germany. So basically, you could have had that company for nothing. In other words, if you weather the crisis intact, you will have a buyer's market for securities and assets that will then rise back. And so even if in nominal terms you take a large hit, you will be able, within a generation, to more than make up for everything that's lost. And history teaches us that countries bounce back. We've seen that in Germany after World War II, Japan after World War II, Korea after Korean War, Russia after the collapse of the Soviet Union. That always happens. It'll happen after this crisis as well. So stay put, invest into a cash business, and weather the crisis.
Yeah, some
life
very
will
good
be
ideas
fine.
and yeah, agreed, actually, especially on the business part and opening those kind of new ventures and cash incomes. That was Alex Krainer. Alex, I want to thank you for coming to my show. Great chat, and I hope to host you sometime soon again.
It was a pleasure, Lucian. Until the next time, all the best.